ahead and get started. This meeting is being recorded. By continuing, you are consenting to be recorded. All right, and so, welcome. I'd like to get to know everybody. I would love it if you could make sure that your name is clearly visible in the participants list. And we'd like to know who you are. So if you don't have your full name and your district in your chat or in your participant list, please put it in the chat. I am Ann Bauer at OPI, and I'm really glad that y'all are here. We had talked about the recording. And so I'll launch right into how to navigate the 1920 report card. So first of all, you'll click on a link. And I want to point out this page as well. This gives you some overview of what's happening with the 1920 report card, most of which we will cover here today. But once you get out to this page, and I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat, we'll be able to navigate right here to either the state, district, or the school report card. And for purposes of our talk today, I'm going to go right to the district report card. And on that report card, you can choose the level of the report card, state, district, or school, as I mentioned, and I'm choosing the district. Once you get there, you can select the district or the school with this drop down. You can select a previous year, and you can click this box to expand the selection for more information, and I'll demonstrate that. So here we are on the district page. I'm going to go ahead and type in HELENA space H, and that is going to give me my son's school district. And I'm going to click View Report. Here we are. And in this district, it has two high schools, Capitol and Helena High School. Scrolling down a little bit, you'll notice that we have these items here: graduating high school in 4 years, post-secondary enrollment, school attendance, educator qualifications, school quality, climate and safety, school finance. And you'll see those elements repeated throughout the report card. Now, if you want to look at this, for example, we want to see this graduation rate here. We wonder what it is for the previous year. So we can go back up here and click on 1819 and again hit View Report. And you can see that some of the missing information that we don't have this year, you can see that displayed first, but you can also compare what that report card looked like in terms of the graduation rate in the previous years. So moving back to this, I want to point out that there are several things missing from this report card. And as we saw, the student achievement data is probably the first and foremost, and that includes those proficiency levels for science, reading, and math. It also doesn't include the student achievement progress scores if you're looking at the elementary report card, and that will show you the student progress in reading and math. Both the high school and the elementary typically have the English language proficiency progress, and high schools have the college and career readiness. None of those elements are available this year due to the waivers that were given to all the states by the U.S. Department of Education in March of 2020. So with all of that said, I'd like to cover now some of the highlights of the data that are included in the report card. Is Ken Bailey present? Let's see. All right, Nicole, would you please take us through the information about the per pupil expenditures in the report card? And I'll just move the slides when you indicate.
Yes, hello, my name is Nicole Thuat. I'm a school finance specialist for the Office of Public Instruction, standing in for Ken Bailey today. So for per pupil expenditures for the school year 2019-2020, enrollment for the purpose of calculating per pupil expenditures is 148,547 students. You can see that the school level direct, which is the amount that was allocated on a school level by the districts, is $9,050.30 per pupil. The school district-wide allocation is $2,615.92 per pupil. And the total per pupil expenditures is $11,666.22. With total school expenditures, they're at the bottom of the page. So new for the 2019-2020 school year, the per pupil expenditures now includes school foods and transportation. So there was an increase in per pupil expenditure of $10,474 in the prior year to $11,666 per pupil in the current year. The CARES money is shown separately on the OPI website and is not included in the total.
I'm just pulling that up really quickly so that people can see what it looks like. Heading back over here. Thank you, Nicole. Very much appreciated. Michael, would you like to discuss the next piece here, which is graduation?
Yes, thank you, Anne. Hello, everybody. So the 2020 graduation rate, as you can see, was 85.89 for a very slight reduction from 2019, of just almost about 0.75%. In the historical view, that's a normal, what we would call a normal fluctuation. Our graduation rates have been increasing over the last 7 to 8 years and kind of starting to plateau a little bit. So this is a pretty expected, I guess, number to see. Most groups, as you can see, saw small drops or increases, and of course, our American Indian students actually saw I believe that was one of the largest increases we saw of our subgroups. And so that was actually good news to see that starting to inch up a little bit higher and close that gap between our all student graduation rate. It's down, the gap now is about 18%. That's coming down from the low 20s in historical past. So that's good. One thing not on the slide there that I will mention, and this got talked about when we released graduation rates earlier this year, was there was no discernible effect from COVID on graduation rates. So that was a lot of speculation that we would see a lot of impact from COVID, but and perhaps there was, but it was not reflected in the rates that we ended up seeing. So, and as you can see on this page here, this is where this is a snapshot from the report card, and you can this is viewable on all of the state, district, and school report cards. If we break it down by many different race, ethnicity, gender, English learner, students with disability, economic disadvantage, etc., all the various graduation rates of those subgroups. And again, no discernible effect and no large fluctuations out of that from prior years. So we'll see what this year brings in a year from now. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is the school quality, climate, and safety. The data here comes from the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. Any of you school officials will know that that is a very large data collection, and I'll just say off the bat, the quality of that data is sometimes questioned. That's been an ongoing thing for at least as long as I've been doing this. So I was kind of trying to note that very first, that data comes directly from you guys, from the schools, does not go through the OPI. And where the quality questions do come up is not everybody answers some of those questions in the same context. So anyhow, important to note. The other thing to note here is, geez, we're looking at 2017, 2018. That is the most recent available that was released just last fall. What you will notice, the data being as published on the report card, you'll see a number of asterisks, and asterisks on the report card means that the data has been masked due to the size of that number. And typically it's 5 students or under. When you start to get in showing numbers that small, as we all know, it may be you may be able to personally identify students down to those levels of numbers. So, bit of good news here: the actual law enforcement referrals went down quite a bit from the prior, I guess, 2015, 2016, a couple hundred. That was a pretty significant thing that we saw there. As well as we also saw our students taking accelerated coursework went up. The last thing I will say on this, it's also not on the slide, is again, this comes directly from the Office of Civil Rights, and they have some great tools there if you're really interested in this data, to going straight to their website and looking at the data raw there as well is quite helpful. So I think that's all I have on this. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Michael. Now I'll introduce Julie Merkel, our Senior Manager of School Innovation and Improvement, to introduce herself and discuss the 2020 Educator Qualifications.
Thanks, Anne. Yes, my name is Julie Merkel, and I am a Senior Manager here at the Montana Office of Public Instruction. And so just wanted to share with you today, and would you go back one slide for me, please? Oh, no, I guess that was sorry, it is the next one. In terms of educator qualifications in 1920, what you will see on the report card here is it outlines the total number of teachers that we have in the state of Montana. Inexperienced are teachers that have 1 year of experience or less, a few months, I guess. And when you look at provisional credits under here for teachers, what that means is the folks that have a provisional license, what we call as a class 5 license. And then out of field would be teachers who are licensed maybe in an area, but they're teaching outside of that area. So maybe you have an endorsement to teach in science, but you are teaching in science and math, and you don't have an endorsement to be teaching in math, then you would be considered out of field. And so what you can see there is that we have a very small percentage of teachers in the state of Montana that are inexperienced. We have a small percentage of teachers overall that have provisional license or teachers who are out of field. The most critical piece there is when we're looking at this data is that we take a look at ensuring that there's not some disproportional rates among 2 different categories. One is around minority status, and one is around a minority and what's the other? Poverty. So those would be the 2 that we want to take a look at. So we want to be sure in the state of Montana that we don't have a disproportionate amount of inexperienced or out of field teachers teaching in schools that have high poverty counts versus schools that have low poverty counts. Same thing, do we have the same number of teachers proportionately teaching in schools that have a high percentage of minority status in their enrollment versus those that may not have a high level of minority students? And so, and on that slide, what you can see there is that in fact in Montana, we have a very equal amount of teachers. There is no disproportional amount that are teaching in our minority schools or in our poverty schools. And so I think that's the most important piece from that data that is represented there. And that is similar to what we had last year.
Thank you so much, Julie. I would like to pause at this time and see if anyone has any questions about anything we've discussed on the report card or anything we haven't discussed on the report card. I would invite you to unmute yourself or to put a question in the chat for us. All righty. Well, we will also have our contact information at the end of the slide if you happen to think of something later, if something comes up. All right, so moving along then, I'm going to call on Ashley McGrath, who's our State Assessment Director, to introduce herself and discuss USED's guidance on assessment, accountability, and reporting, guidance that we received on February 22nd and following discussions. Ashley, please.
Thank you, Anne, and thanks for the introduction. I will come on video here so everybody can see me. As you said, my name is Ashley McGrath, and I'm the Director for Assessment. And really, there are a lot of things changing at a rapid pace around the sections of assessment, accountability, and report cards. So this is a little bit of a tour and recollection of some key dates and discussions that we've had. Looking at the participant list here, I see some familiar faces, and so it's great to connect with you guys virtually. And what we have here on the slide is to show some information in response to the Department of Education's notice to states on this memo outlining for this school year, so 20 to 21, what their expectations are in light of accountability, school identification, transparency and reporting, assessments, and public comment. So this was disseminated to states on February 22nd, and it outlines some areas that they were granting states flexibility who submitted the template. And so that is also an element of conversation that we wanted to highlight. So if you could turn the next slide, please, and thank you. What I wanted to kind of do is just reiterate some of those key dates so that the story is really clear where we're at today. So February 5th, Montana submitted a waiver application to the U.S. Department of Education, and included in that was a request for maximum relief on accountability, assessment, and reporting. We have not yet received a final determination of that waiver application that we submitted on February 5th. As you just saw on that previous slide, February 22nd, we received this invitation for the additional flexibilities from the department that included some key things in there that Montana was seeking. So for instance, relief from that 95% participation requirement in statewide assessments. And that's one of the things identified within that template and that communication to states. Another thing that has happened in the last couple of days here as I recall some of these dates for you is on March 4th, we actually had an invitation to have a conversation with U.S. Department of Education as far as clarifications and additional information on the OPI's waiver. And so what they really wanted to learn from us was Montana's unique conditions and circumstances regarding the impetus for submitting that waiver so that they could use that as far as their consideration of Montana's full waiver application. What we really emphasized with the department is we were seeking full flexibility where possible. And some things important on these bullets for you is that looking at where we're at today, the testing windows have opened for Smarter Balance. So the current assessment schedule remains in effect. We've extended our test windows where possible, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on that as we move forward. There really safety is first. And so the health, well-being, safety of students really needs to take priority in all our conversations at looking at what our testing plans are for this spring. One of the things prior to the February 22nd release that we did was on February 19th, we released our medical exemption waiver, or that COVID reason option for districts to apply to. And one of the things that we're in conversation right now is if Montana were to submit the template, for instance, would this medical exemption still be relevant, or would that be necessary this spring since that 95% participation waiver would be in effect. But those, again, are things that are happening right now, conversations and coordinations with the department that we still need to make. And so as far as looking at our focus and our priorities, it is flexibility, it is support for our school districts, and we've reiterated that point with the department. If we could transition to the next slide, please. On March 5th, the superintendent had a press release to, again, provide kind of some cliff notes on where we're at in these conversations with the U.S. Department of Education as far as pursuing these flexibilities on behalf of school districts. And in that memo, there were some proposals that were offered for options for school. And in these proposals, what was stated was the shortened smarter balance assessment, which is one of the things that the department recommended states do as far as flexibilities in reference to that February 22nd memo. And so we have actually secured that. The Smarter Balance Assessment is shortened. The test window opened on March 8th, so that's Monday. And so we've had, just 3 full days completed. And in those 3 full days, we actually statewide have had over 900 test completions take place. And then another proposed option in conversation with the U.S. Department of Education is looking at the option to use alternative measures like local interim assessments in place of the statewide assessments. What I really want to point out, though, is, as I mentioned in kind of this recalling of dates and key points, we are still in conversation with the U.S. Department of Education. We're also still in conversation with our testing contractors to see what support and flexibilities are feasible within the spring. So what is nice about extending these test windows is that it also grants all of us time to consider what test plans are most appropriate for us this remaining spring. Could we transition to the next slide, please? Great, thank you. So that was just my little overview first to set the stage for assessment. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Mergel, to explain where we're at with opportunities to learn.
Thanks, Ashley. We appreciate it. Yes, at the Montana Office of Public Instruction, we are proposing to administer an opportunity to learn survey with students and teachers in early May. The purpose for this OTL survey is to really gather some of the more soft data, if you will, that can help us interpret some of the assessment data, contextualize those assessments, and really start to determine and target the supports and services that are needed. We feel like it's really important that sometimes we have those assessments, if not all, 95% of the kiddos are taking it, sometimes we may get certain test results for students, and it may be based upon who actually took the test, because not all kids are taking the test. And so we really want to understand the context in which that testing and the learning has transpired this year, because we might get a result, and the result of that assessment might be that, well, maybe the kid just really didn't understand the concept, when in fact it might have been that they didn't have access to learning this year. Maybe they were in a remote setting and didn't have access to good, strong internet or devices. And so we're trying to really contextualize, if you will, some of the opportunities to learn this particular school year, and trying to get a better understanding of the learning as if it was even across our students, or what degree it is unfinished. So that is what we're trying to take a look at, getting those out in ways that then we could give the results back to the school districts, but also for them to use that data to understand really what was the type of instruction, the level of engagement, and how did some of maybe those social and emotional pieces play out within this survey. So stay tuned for more information on that. Thanks, Ashley.
Awesome. So this, we're just going to kind of dive in deep a little bit into that February 22nd memo and those 4 points that I had referenced as far as accountability, school identification, transparency, reporting, assessment, and public comment. And definitely, Anne and Julie, please feel free to either explain further or clarify any of the statements here. So really at that kind of broad brush stroke of information, there was a lot of narrative there to kind of further dive into these sections and what flexibilities that the department was really offering here. So the first piece in looking at accountability school identification is really removing that annual meaningful differentiation requirement, that identification component that we have within the accountability system. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, that 95% participation rate in looking at the academic achievement indicator requirement, where that stands. And so if a state were to actually request to have these waivers in place and use that template, then there are some things that are still required of the state that are kind of referenced here in the center of the screen on what's required. So that means that the state would then have to resume identification in the fall. Really a big emphasis that I read into this letter was ensuring transparency to parents and the public. And so one of the things they emphasized, although they would consider that waiver for the 95% participation, they still will require states to report the percentage of students not assessed and also disaggregated by those subgroups. They did suggest to states that wherever possible that they reduce the stakes. So there are other states that have more kind of, I think, rigid requirements that they use with their achievement data than Montana does. And so in that instance, for instance, if you were using it to exit students for graduation or something like that, they have recommended to reduce those stakes. So that's a little bit, I think, as far as dissecting the accountability school identification section. Anne or Julie, do you guys want to offer up any more information on that section or your interpretation? All right, so next slide then, please. So for the transparency slide, one of the things that I internalized with this memo is reporting is a big question in practice. And so with granting these flexibilities, with the variability that we have in schooling across the state, you know, what does really reporting, what is it? What should it be? What could it be? All of those pieces come to my mind. And so I think consultation here is key. Should Montana submit that template? And so some other components that they had included in here on if the template was submitted by the OPI to secure these waivers, there are elements within the transparency reporting section as far as the requirement to report on disaggregated chronic absenteeism, also where a state collects this, so this is key, what information is collected on student educator access, to that extent practicable reporting that information for the public, and also transparency on those opportunity to learn or OTL measures that Dr. Mergel discussed earlier. So again, a key point for me is consultation with our technical advisory committee or TAC, our test delivery contractors, assessment consortium, and school districts as far as reporting and what this reporting actually looks like with these waivers and flexibilities in place. Next slide, please. So for assessments, in reference to the February 22nd memo, no blanket waivers will be granted. So they made that really clear in the memo, but that is still something that we are in conversations with the U.S. Department of Education about, is what level of consideration will they make on our original February 5th waiver application, which did request full relief from that requirement. So again, still in conversation. Safety first, highlighted here, it was made really clear if a child is unable to attend school safely, it is not expected that they would be brought onto the school for the sole purpose of taking the test. Really, another key point I find with this one is focus on these assessments to provide parents, educators, and the public with information about student performance so that it can help target resources and supports. The department then further suggested flexibilities for states to consider if they had not already done so. And that was shortening the assessment, offering remote administrations, extending test windows, and additional information as far as reporting, and then English language proficiency flexibilities. So to a large extent, the OPI has secured all of these things with the exception of the remote proctoring component. The OPI has determined it's not actually a practicable component to have remote offerings this school year. So there will be no remote proctoring or that at-home testing this year. As far as our expectations for assessments, where it is safe to do so, the shortened Smarter Balance blueprint will be in place. And for the remaining assessments, those testing windows have been extended to the greatest extent practicable. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, shortened Smarter Balance. So the test is open, it is in place. What we did is that we essentially removed, there are 4 components historically speaking for Smarter Balance. So those computer adaptive test sections, so the CAT and also the performance task or the PT. What we did is we removed the ELA PT from this year's administration or that blueprint, and that was a permanent selection. So this blueprint will be with us into the future. And this modification to the assessment essentially is reducing it to an overall on average test length of 3 to 4 hours. So in other words, that means that the test has been shortened 1 to 2 hours on average for these students. The link that's on here on the slide is actually a session by Dwayne Schlabaugh, sorry about that, Dwayne, our assessment specialist who is on the call here and who can probably answer more detailed questions on this modification. Next slide, please. And the science assessment update, so the information we have here is the field test, the blueprint that's in place here. This is our first time with this online assessment that aligned to the new 3-dimensional standards for science. It's a great opportunity for schools to really overall have that standards implementation realized. So it helps educators and students fully transition to the new science standards in the new tested grades. So it's administered at grades 5, 8, and 11 with new item types, and also it being online. So the CRT, the days before, those were all paper-based administrations. And what's important to emphasize here is that we did secure a field test waiver, meaning that the accountability and reporting requirements are removed. And so we are looking to have modified reporting so that there is feedback to school districts, but there is not a requirement in place this school year to do so, though. So there is great flexibility that has already been provided for this assessment. And next slide, please. I believe this is the final one for me. And the ACT update here. And so with the ACT, we've also secured some flexibilities here. So for any school that is unable to administer their assessments at one of the 3 published dates that we have, the first one opening on March 23rd. If a school is unable in those 3 instances and requires an emergency option, there will be an additional COVID emergency testing date in early May that they could take advantage of. And there is also flexibility as far as which mode a school is wanting to take advantage of, whether that's a paper option or online option or a combination of both. And so we have secured those flexibilities and are looking forward to the spring. So I believe that summarizes for me and the information to share on assessments and where we're at in response to that February 22nd memo.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you everyone for all of your great insights that have been shared here today. I'd like to pause one more time and ask if there are any questions that have come up from the audience while we've been discussing this. All righty, well, I will leave you then with our contact information. I've put people's email addresses on the final slide. If you have any other questions that come up, please contact us. We're here. And as Ashley mentioned, things are moving rather rapidly. We are trying to remain flexible and responsive in the face of a very challenging year that we're all having. And we appreciate your partnership in all of these things. And so please get a hold of us if any questions or concerns or feedback come up for you. So that concludes our presentation here today. And I will close out the presentation, and Marcy, would you please stop recording? But